For Jean Piaget, cognitive development in terms of how persons develop and acquire knowledge over time, he equated the developing mind to that of a construction site, specifically scaffolding. He says a child's mental growth has the ability to adapt to new situations via assimilation and accommodation. Assimilation is the process of including a new event into one's existing inner view of the world, and accommodation is the process of changing one's inner view and behavior when new information requires change. Mental growth takes place in 4 stages, and a child reacts differently at each stage. So for him, the child's mind starts off as a basic structure, and as information is passed on over time and is acquired, you use scaffolding. So you add layers and layers onto that knowledge. So for example, assimilation could be that a child learns that a family is mommy, daddy, son and daughter. And as they go to school, they realize that you have other families where it's just a mother and the children, or the grandparents live in the household as well. So their definition of what a family is goes from assimilation to accommodation, where they're accommodating new information onto the same initial concept of a family, right? The first stage of cognitive development for Piaget is that of the sensorimotor stage from 0 to 2 years, and it is pretty much self-explanatory. Basically, during this period, infants develop an understanding of the world through trial and error using their senses and actions. That is their motor movements. That is why you'll find children, toddlers, babies want to put everything in their mouth. They need to touch it. They need to feel it. They want to hear it. They need to experience the world for themselves. So the child develops basic ideas of cause and effect and object permanence, meaning that if you ever played hide and seek with a toddler, if you notice, they will go, as you're counting, they'll just stand in the middle of the room and cover their eyes, and they are convinced that you cannot see them. Their concept of object permanence is a little shaky, wherein in their mind, if they don't see it, it doesn't exist. Which is why, again, babies as well may have issues that when you leave a room, they become fearful because they are in a situation where they believe that mommy has disappeared. Infants think by acting on the world with their eyes, ears, hands, and mouth. The second stage of cognitive development is that of the pre-operational stage, 2 to 7 years, where the child begins to represent the world symbolically. So they're a little less literal where they're just using their senses. During this period, children are thinking at a symbolic level, but are not yet using cognitive operations. So the child's thinking during this stage is pre-operations, like it says. The child cannot use logic or transform, combine, or separate ideas. And this is when development of language and make-believe play takes place. So if you tell a child at this stage to look up and down when crossing the road, they are literally looking up in the sky and down at the ground before they cross the road, as opposed to interpreting what you say to mean looking left and right before crossing the road. At the concrete operational stage, 7 to 11 years, Piaget says that this stage is characterized by the development of organized and rational thinking. Piaget considered the concrete stage a major turning point in the child's cognitive development because it marks the beginning of logical or operational thought. The child is now mature enough to use logical thought or operations such as rules, but can apply logic and physical objects. But can only apply logic to physical objects. So they, again, need to see for themselves how things are cause and effect. Children gain the abilities of conversation, such as through number, area, volume, orientation, reversibility, transivity, and class inclusion. However, although children can solve problems in a logical fashion, they are typically not able to think abstractly or hypothetically. So, therefore, the thinking is not yet abstract. So, at this age, they're just starting school and they're learning the basic rudiments of 1 plus 1 is this, versus that divided into another figure would result in something. So they're still very straightforward, and they can now start to think a little bit in theory, but it has to be straightforward. So a lot of the testing at this point is about comprehension and recollection more than problem solving. So at the formal operational stage for PhD, which is the fourth and final stage, it starts at 12 years old and continues into adulthood. So as adolescents enter this stage, they gain the ability to think in an abstract manner by manipulating ideas in their head without any dependence on concrete manipulation. So at this stage, they no longer need like the building blocks to figure out a problem. Mental abilities is developed, so they're able to problem solve strictly from a theoretical perspective. He or she can do mathematical calculations, think creatively, use abstract thinking, and imagine the outcome of particular actions. The capacity of abstract thought happens here, and so does systematic thinking is enabled. Finally, you have the formal operational thought, and again, it's from 12 to adulthood. And under this section, formal operational, again, the individual is supposed to develop hypothetical deductive reasoning, and it's the ability to think scientifically through generating predictions or hypotheses about the world to answer questions. The individual will approach problems in a systematic and organized manner rather than through trial and error. And when we talk about abstract thought at the formal operational stage, it means that concrete operations are carried out on things, whereas formal operations are carried out on ideas. So it's a lot less practical and very theoretical at this point. The individual can think about hypothetical and abstract concepts they have yet to experience. Abstract thought is important for planning regarding the future. So as you can see, the scaffolding, assimilation and accommodation of knowledge throughout life, it goes from being very much through the senses, then it transitions into understanding the very basic rudiments of knowledge acquisition, then it goes into practical problem solving where they have to have tangible things in order to problem solve, and then they move on to the final stage of formal operational thought where they can problem solve from a theoretical perspective, and abstract thought is possible. The final theory of development that we'll talk about is that of moral development by Lawrence Kohlberg. How is it that we got to a point where we can establish and say to ourselves, this is right, this is wrong, this is okay, this is morally incorrect, and so on? How did we get to that point? And that is what Lawrence Kohlberg focused mostly on. He was interested in the moral stages of development, and he began his study of moral thinking by creating stories and asking children, adolescents, and adults questions about the stories. Now, the scenario that Lawrence Kohlberg gave was a man named Heinz, whose wife is dying of cancer, knows about a drug that might save her life. He approaches the pharmacist who has the drug, but the pharmacist refuses to give him the drug without being paid a very high price. Heinz is unable to scrape together the money and eventually decides to steal the drug. This is a scenario he gave to children, teenagers, adults, older adults. And the questions he asked as a follow-up were, should Heinz have stolen the drug? And if so, why? If not, why? And based on the reasons given, he developed 3 levels of morality, each with 2 stages. So for him, you have the pre-conventional level, and at that level you have the heteronomous morality and the individualism, purpose, and exchange. On the conventional level, you have stage 3, which is mutual, interpersonal expectations, relationships, and interpersonal conformity. And stage 4, social system morality. The third level is post-conventional level, where you have stage 5, social contracts / utility and individual rights, and stage 6, universal ethical principles. And we'll go into each of them. For the pre-conventional level, it's based primarily on punishments and rewards from the external world. So at this stage of moral development, you're doing things based on what you'll get from it or the consequences. So if I am not nice to my sister, I will get a spanking. If I am nice, I may get a sweetie. So your moral compass is developed and determined based on the consequences. The conventional level, the individual abides by standards such as those learned from parents or society's laws. So at this point, we're looking at more of the consequences of the society. So obeying the laws, the rules and regulations of the land, simply because you don't want to go to jail or because your parents taught you that this is the right thing to do. At the post-conventional level, it's more of a mature level of moral development and view. The individual recognizes alternative moral courses, explores the options, and then develops an increasingly personal moral code. So at this point, you would have exposed yourself to religion, the views of society, of other societies, parents, friends, peers, and based on different scenarios that you have experienced throughout your life, you now determine the gray areas, so to speak, what is right and what you consider wrong, taking into consideration everything that you've learned socially. And this picture summarizes it beautifully, where we talk about stage 1, which is punishment and obedience orientation, doing what is right because of fear of punishment. So at this stage, you do things because you don't want any beating, you don't want to go to jail. And what I like about Lawrence Kohlberg is that his stages aren't restricted to any type of age range. So you can be at stage 1 at 50 years old. You can be at stage 6 at 15 years old. It's just a matter of where you gauge your morality. Stage 2 is hedonistic orientation, which is doing what is right for personal gain, perhaps a reward. So you join the Kiwanis Club not because it will be helping persons, but because you will get rewarded for helping persons. You get the recognition, you get to be on the front of the paper, and so on. On level 2, conventional morality, as it implies, it's conventions of society. Stage 3 says the interpersonal concordance orientation is doing what is right according to the majority to be a good boy or a good girl. And again, you can see this a lot in the classroom setting where they say, okay, you did very well, you did what is right, so everybody clap you, you become the prefect, and so on. Stage 4 speaks to law and order orientation, doing what is right because it is your duty and helps society. So this is when you are exposed to the national anthem, the role of police officers, of the army, and all of those different things. And because you want to make society better, you're playing your part. You don't litter, you obey the law, you don't murder, you don't steal, because you want your country to be a better place. And of course, the final stage, post-conventional morality, stage 5, speaks to social contract and legalistic orientation, and it is doing what is right, even if it is against the law, because the law is too restrictive. So there's a lot of waves about the persecution of persons who now perform abortions in particular states in the United States. And, they keep bringing up different scenarios like, what if you become pregnant as a result of rape? So for persons who are at that stage, they would allow or not say that the person is wrong for having an abortion, even though it is illegal because of the circumstances. So even though you know the law, you believe that it's too restrictive and you disagree with it, so you do what you want to do, so a certain extent. And of course, the final stage, universal ethical principles orientation, doing what is right because of our inner consciousness, which has absorbed the principles of justice and equality and sacredness of life. So again, you now look at the world, your understanding, your religious perspective is taken into consideration, the laws of the land and all of those experiences come together, and you create your own cocktail of what moral development and moral right and wrong is for you. Alright? And that brings us to the end of Unit 5 of the developmental theories for psychology. And again, any questions or queries, you can email me, contact me, or post it on the message board.